Welcome back and welcome to level 5 of this project. In this level, we are not going to add anything new. Instead, we're just going to restructure and refactor our code a little bit because I think it can have a better file structure. Currently, we have a lot of logic inside this server.ts, our API, and of course inside of the database services. And we currently have this flat hierarchy, but I would like to give it a little bit more structure, which would be very useful if this project grows bigger. And of course, I want you to make this project a lot bigger. You should just take this as a starting point and then expand upon it. So first of all, the things that I would like to do is to split this into 3 layers. I would like to have a router layer, which will be a file or layer that just receives a request, and then we'll have a controller layer that will handle the logic and handle what is going to happen with that request. And finally, we will have a data access layer, which will of course be our database access services. So this means that the routers will receive a request. They will then forward that request to the controller, and the controller has the responsibility of managing what it should do, and it will reach out to the services that it needs in order to fulfill the need of that request. And then it will finally return back to the router, which will then respond. So that is the layer or architecture that I would like to have. So let's begin by taking out a lot of this logic from inside the server.ts and putting it inside of a controller class instead. So I'm just gonna create some new directories. I'll do mkdir, and then I'll do inside the source directory, I will make a directory called controllers, and then I'll make a file called book controller.ts, and of course this should be inside of this new directory. So we'll do inside the controllers like this. And if we open it up, let's see where we have it, controller, book controllers.js. Good. In here, I would like to define a new class, which I will call book controller. And this class I will export as the default, and I'll do a new book controller like this. All right, so this class is going to have some functions that take in a request and a response, and then they're going to execute the logic that we right now have inside of our server.ts. So we can start out by getting the logic from this function that we use for the books endpoint, the get request to the books endpoint. And let's make a public function, and let's paste this in and just make sure to clean it up. So this will be a public async function, and we will call it get books. And then we cannot, because we're using a named function, we cannot have the arrow. And I think we are missing one curly bracket in the end, like this. And because this is a class, I shouldn't even be using the function keyword. Instead, we just do like this, and it is now a method on this class. Of course, in order to do this, we need to import the DB Prisma service. So we import that one. And then this res.status is not currently callable, and that's because we're not actually importing these request and response from Express. So we have the wrong types. So let's just grab them from over here, and then we can paste them like this. And as you can see now, the error goes away because now it is the correct types that we're actually using. So this will be a function that does exactly the same thing as we had previously over here. The only difference is that, or the reason that we do it is that now we can use this function in here. So we can grab, instead of making an anonymous function here, we can instead use the book controller dot get books. So we're doing exactly the same thing as before. It just looks a little bit more clean because we have the endpoint, and then we have the function that is going to be called. And that's the book controller, and the book controller is going to get the books. And this also means that at this point in the server.ts file, we don't have to worry about how the book controller gets its books. We really don't care about that. And if the book controller changes how it works in some time in the future, that's also all right, because it is not the responsibility of this file. So the only responsibility of this file will be to get a request and then ask the controller to make sure to handle that request. And we will do exactly the same thing with all the rest of these. So again, if you'd like to try it out on your own, I encourage you to do that. Otherwise, just keep on watching, and I will be making all of these, turn them into functions in the book controller. So I'll just go ahead and do that. and then we'll continue afterwards. All right, so now that I have all of these functions defined in my controller class, I will of course just be using them over here inside of the API. So here I will do book controller.get book by ID. This will be the book controller.insert, not by ID, sorry. Let's go and find that, insert book, like that. Insert book, and this one will be book controller.update book by ID and book controller.delete book. Let's just rename this to ID as well, like this. So this already made our server.ts file very much cleaner. It is very concise and much more clean. But there's one more thing I would like to do. I would like to extract all these endpoints again and put them into a separate file. And this separate file will be a router. And then we will just ask the server to use that router. So now that we have these, let's go ahead and make that router. So we're going to make a new directory one more time, and we'll call it routers inside the source directory. And then we will create inside source and inside routers, we will do a book router.ts. And let's open up that one. Good. And inside of here, again, we're going to need Express because we're going to do something very similar to this. So I'm just gonna cut all these endpoints and paste them in here instead. But then instead of this being the app, I would instead like to call this book router. And then we of course have to create this book router. And the way that we create it is just by creating a const, a variable called book router, and we will assign this to be express.router. And of course we need to import express. So I'm just going to copy that from over here and paste that in. We don't need these two types, so we'll remove those. And now we have express. And of course we also need to import our controller. And now we have this router. Finally, I need to export the router so that we can use it somewhere else, book router, like this. And then there's one more thing that I would like to change. And that is that instead of having the router have books specified in here, we're going to specify it over in the server. So jumping back to the server.ts file, we of course now have to use this router. And the way that we can do it is by typing app.use, and then in here we do book router. So now we're going to use the book router. But before we do that, I'm going to specify that all endpoints that go to /books, are going to be using this router. So this means that whenever the API gets a request to /books, that request will be forwarded into the book router. And then if we go back to the book router, we can now remove /books from here because this will already be handled by the previous step. So we'll do like this. So this means that if we just get like this, if we just get a request to /books, then we're going to intercept it here and we're going to pass it on to the book router. And the book router now knows that we got the /books. So it will just be the default path, or it will be the root path of the router. And that is why we don't specify books in here anymore. So we have omitted this /books. So now our book router is actually done. And this is starting to look very clean. There's just one more thing I would like to do in this file, and it is just to split it up even more. So I'm going to create a new file called app.ts inside of the source directory. So just at the root of the source. And in this app.ts, I would like to create the app. So I'm going to do like this and open up the app.ts. So inside of this, I will now import everything that I need. And finally, I will do an export default of the app like this. And then in the server.ts, we will of course need to import this app and delete everything else. And we also need the port. That one was one too many, like this. This now means that the app in itself, the app file, is just the app. It's where we create the app from Express. And it is where we specify everything that the app has to use, like express.json, such that we can intercept post requests with bodies. And the books router is also in this file. And then over here in the server.ts, this is simply about starting the server. So in here, we only have the import of the app, and then we start the app, or we start the server by calling this app.listen. So that's just one more layer, or one more splitting of the responsibilities of these files, because I want my files to have one purpose only. So that is why I do this split into app.ts and server.ts. Maybe this is too much. Some people would like this. I like it. Other people would say that it's too much of splitting it. It is up to personal preference, but I like it this way. So now that we have this out of the way, we are actually having a very nice setup. We have our controller, which handles all of this logic that it receives from the router. So the router is going to call the controller, and then the controller is going to call all our services. And the last thing that I want to make is just to put these two services into a new directory called services, just to make it a little bit more clean. So we'll make one more directory inside source and call this one services. And then we will just be moving the two database services into this services directory. And then it asks if I want to update my imports, and yes, I would like to do that. I like all the files that are importing these services to change the path that they import from. All right, and we also have a change. Where do we have change? No, I think we're all good. So that was it for level 5. Level 5 was just about restructuring our project, because this project structure is a little bit more set up to becoming a very big project. If we just like before had everything in the root, it would be very cluttered and hard to figure out what code goes where. But when we have this layered architecture, it's a bit better and easier to understand the structure of our code. So again, just to repeat it, we have our routers which receive the request. And then inside the routers, we then call some function on the controller. And the controller is then responsible for the logic that handles how we handle this request. And that is why it reaches out to the database services to ask them to get stuff or post stuff or update stuff. And then the services are responsible for that connection to the database. So that's the kind of 3-layer architecture that I'm going for. All right, I hope you learned something new, and I hope you had fun. And then I'll just see you in the next level. Happy coding.